There is an invisible force that guides our steps, as if the universe were silently weaving the threads of existence with precision. In moments of deep loneliness or confusion, something within us whispers that there's a meeting already destined, a connection that transcends time and space. It's as if two souls share the same heart even when they are far apart. For those who have felt that inexplicable flame burning for someone who seemed made of the same essence, the idea that fate works to reunite these twin souls gains powerful meaning. What happens when two halves of the same soul recognize each other? And how does destiny act to bring them back together even after separation? The answer, surprisingly, may lie in the depths of the psyche, where Carl Jung left us hidden maps to reunion. If you believe that nothing is by chance, comment below. I trust the invisible force that guides me. To understand how destiny works to reunite mirrored souls, we need to dive into the central concepts of Carl Jung's analytical psychology. He believed that human life is guided by a deep search for wholeness, a process he called individuation. This journey leads us to integrate unconscious parts of ourselves, revealing what we project onto others and often avoid within. In the phenomenon of souls recognizing each other as twin flames, we find intense manifestations of projection. We see in the other what we lack or haven't yet accepted. Jung observed that these relationships act as powerful levers of transformation precisely because they bring our most hidden aspects to the surface, including the shadow, that collection of emotions, memories, and repressed impulses that must be seen in order for us to grow. The relationship between these souls is deeply archetypal, evoking the principles of animus and anima, the unconscious representations of the masculine within the female psyche and the feminine within the male. When these inner forces are activated by the encounter with the flame, a collision occurs between who we are and who we are meant to become. Separation is often inevitable because it is in that distance that the psyche reorganizes, allowing each person to progress in their individuation. Only after this inner transformation can destiny symbolically allow reunion. Thus, destiny is not a blind force, but the movement of the psyche in its quest for wholeness. Jung teaches us that the true reunion of twin flames is not guaranteed by luck, but by the courage to face oneself. The meeting of two people who share a deep and inexplicable connection usually provokes a sense of instant recognition, as if an invisible mirror reveals forgotten parts of the self. Within Jungian analytical psychology, this phenomenon can be understood through the mechanism of projection, a process in which the unconscious transfers unrecognized internal contents onto another person. When we encounter someone who reflects what we haven't yet integrated within our own psyche, the experience is overwhelming. We feel attracted, fascinated, touched on a level beyond reason. From this perspective, the twin flame becomes the living vessel for our most intense projections. Jung explained that what we don't consciously accept in ourselves tends to be projected onto others, especially in intimate relationships. That's why many describe this connection as magical or fated, because it brings forth deep elements, including archetypes, that were previously dormant. In the case of twin flames, the projection is so intense that it creates the illusion the other person is our missing piece, but in truth they are merely reflecting parts of ourselves we haven't yet had the courage to embrace. This dynamic is especially clear when the other person seems to embody qualities we have repressed, whether courage, sensitivity, freedom, spirituality, or even darker impulses like anger, jealousy, or the desire for control. The relationship becomes a stage where internal dramas play out, often with a mix of ecstasy and pain. The emotional intensity of this kind of connection reveals how deeply the unconscious is involved in the process. The other person becomes a catalyst for transformation, even without meaning to. For Jung, this force doesn't appear by accident. The soul attracts the mirror it needs for its evolution. Therefore, recognizing the twin flame is not a random event, but an encounter with a part of the self that urgently needs to be seen. The problem is that, under the power of projection, the relationship becomes unbalanced. We idealize, expect, demand. When the other person fails to match the projected image, frustration, conflict, and often separation follow. That doesn't mean the connection isn't real, only that it's being lived unconsciously. Consciousness is the key to transforming this dynamic. When we realize we are projecting, that is, assigning to another person traits we haven't yet owned in ourselves, we take the first step toward integration. The recognition of the twin flame then becomes not just an emotional event, but a spiritual call to self-awareness. In this process, the relationship ceases to be a search for wholeness in another and becomes a mirror for individuation itself. At this stage, separation is common. The weight of the projection makes the relationship unstable, often painful, but it is precisely through this separation that the soul begins to see more clearly. The absence of the other forces the psyche to turn inward, to seek within the qualities it once believed only existed outside. When that happens, the projection dissolves, and if reunion happens, it happens on a new level, more conscious, more free. The twin flame, then, is not someone who comes to complete us, but someone who awakens in us the desire to become whole. Jung said, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is a reaction, both are transformed." That sentence perfectly describes what happens in this kind of relationship. The reaction is inevitable, and so is the transformation. But it's essential to understand that true recognition only happens when we stop looking to the other as salvation and begin to see them as a reflection of what we need to develop within. What once seemed like fate, magic, or coincidence becomes understood as the movement of the unconscious in search of wholeness. Projection, in this context, is the mechanism that leads us to the other, only to guide us back to ourselves. Separation between two deeply connected souls often feels like an internal earthquake. The sense of emptiness, the abrupt break in a bond that felt eternal, the silence that used to be filled by a living presence, all of this composes a pain that seems incurable. Yet through the Jungian lens, this rupture is not the end of the journey, but the necessary portal through which the true process of individuation begins. As brutal as it may seem, separation is an essential movement in the psychic alchemy that transforms a bond into a catalyst for inner growth. Jung saw individuation as the path by which a person becomes who they truly are, integrating unconscious aspects into consciousness and expanding contact with the self, the regulating center of the psyche. The soulmate, in this context, appears as a mirror that intensely reveals unintegrated fragments of the self. But as long as we remain fused in the ideal of completion through another, we stay trapped in projection, dependency, and fantasy. That's why, painful as it is, separation is also profoundly transformative. Distance creates a silence that forces introspection. Without the other to lean on or project onto, the individual must face their own emptiness, their own wounds and gaps. The suffering is not in vain. It reveals precisely what still needs healing. This is when the individuation process deepens. The pain of loss becomes fuel for the inner journey. The questions change. They shift from "why did he/she leave?" to "who am I without this person? And what is this absence trying to show me about myself?" This transition marks a turning point. The psyche, in its quest for balance, begins to reorganize. Projected content returns to consciousness. The need arises to confront the shadow, everything that was repressed or neglected. One may discover emotional dependency, masked as unconditional love, or realize that the other was idealized as the savior of old wounds. Facing these inner truths is painful, but absolutely necessary. Separation also allows the development of attributes that once seemed out of reach: emotional autonomy, self-worth, spiritual clarity. All of these begin to flourish when the soul finds a new center within itself. Paradoxically, separation from the twin flame activates a deeper reconnection with the self. The solitary journey becomes a sacred one. The other's absence becomes an inner presence. And for the first time, the individual begins to experience true completeness, one that depends on no one else. Jung believed that the most significant encounters in life are orchestrated by internal needs. Whether reunion happens or not becomes secondary to the transformation that occurs along the way. Love that once felt dependent now reveals itself as an evolutionary force. The connection, even in physical absence, remains alive in the unconscious, serving as a guide, an inspiration, a driving force. The other's flame lit an inner fire, which now must be fed with the soul's own wood. It's not about forgetting or denying the love that was lived. It's about transforming attachment into wisdom, pain into direction, absence into inner presence. At this stage, the relationship with the other is no longer an emotional prison, but a sacred memory, a turning point, an initiation. The individual matures spiritually, understanding that true love does not demand possession or permanence, but growth. From this new center, destiny may eventually allow a reunion, not as a return to what was, but as the meeting of two wholes who no longer seek each other to be complete, but to share what they've become. Separation then is not a mistake or punishment. It's a rite of passage, the moment the soul stops searching for in others what can only be found within. The reunion of twin flames, if it happens, will not be to complete each other, but to share the light they found by walking alone through the darkness. According to Carl Jung, the human soul is made of polarities that coexist and seek integration. At the heart of this psychic duality are two fundamental archetypes, anima and animus. The anima represents the unconscious feminine principle within man, while the animus represents the unconscious masculine principle within woman. These internal figures are not mere concepts. They shape our attitudes, perceptions, and especially our emotional relationships. In the journey of twin flames, recognizing and integrating these aspects is essential for the reunion to be not only emotional, but also spiritual and conscious. The presence of the twin flame powerfully awakens these archetypes. The man projects his anima onto his partner, the woman her animus onto hers. This projection gives the other a mystical aura of perfection. He or she seems to be everything the heart has always longed for: sensitivity, strength, nurturing, courage, transcendence. However, like all projections, this image does not reflect the other's reality, but rather unconscious contents that have not yet been integrated. This dynamic is beautiful but unstable. As the relationship evolves, the projection tends to crumble, revealing the human behind the ideal. That's when conflict, disappointment, and often separation begin. Jung didn't see this as failure, but as opportunity. The collapse of projection is the beginning of true integration. Rather than seeking in the other what is missing, the individual is invited to recognize and develop these aspects within themselves. For a man, this means connecting with his sensitivity, intuition, empathy, qualities traditionally attributed to the feminine. Developing the anima means accepting that emotional strength lies not in denying feelings, but in understanding them. For a woman, integrating the animus means reclaiming her inner strength, her ability to assert herself, to reason, to act in the world. This journey toward inner balance, contrary to popular belief, does not distance lovers. It prepares them to meet again on a higher level of awareness. When anima and animus are not integrated, the individual becomes trapped in repetitive, projective relationships. One seeks in the other what is missing within, creating emotional dependency that sooner or later turns to frustration. But when these archetypes are consciously embraced, an internal alchemy takes place. The person becomes psychologically androgynous in the Jungian sense. They unite the masculine and feminine principles within themselves. This symbolic union, represented by the hieros gamos, the sacred marriage, is one of the pillars of individuation. On the path of twin flames, this process is indispensable. Reunion is only possible in a mature and harmonious way when neither person needs the other to feel whole. Need gives way to choice. The bond is no longer fed by lack or idealization, but by conscious affinity and mutual growth. At this stage, the other ceases to be a distorted mirror and becomes a true companion, someone to share life with, without losing oneself. The integration of anima and animus also expands the ability to love. Love is no longer conditioned on the presence of the other, but becomes an inner quality, a state of being. One loves because they are love. And it is in this vibrational field that destiny can operate reunion, not as a restoration of the past, but as a continuation of a path now free of projections, aware of its shadows, and deeply aligned with the self. Jung said, "What we deny in ourselves, we find in our fate." That's why, as long as the inner masculine and feminine principles remain unconscious, destiny will bring us people who reflect those gaps. But as the psyche balances itself internally, destiny changes. Relationships stop being painful lessons and become meaningful encounters. In the case of twin flames, this inner maturity is what makes reunion possible, not as a repetition of the past, but as an expression of new awareness. This inner union, therefore, is not just a psychological requirement, but a spiritual calling. One who unites anima and animus within finds in the outer world the possibility of meeting the other again, without masks, without dependency, without fear. The true reunion is, above all, a reflection of the union that has already happened within the soul. The idea of destiny is often associated with a mystical, uncontrollable force that directs life events in arbitrary or predetermined ways. However, for Carl Jung, Destiny is not something that comes from the outside, but an inner manifestation that arises from the depths of the unconscious, especially the collective unconscious. This psychic dimension, which transcends the individual, carries the universal archetypes of humanity and deeply influences how we experience life, encounters, and reunions. In this view, the destiny that unites two souls, especially those sharing a profound bond like twin flames, is a symbolic expression of the psyche seeking wholeness. Jung believed that archetypes act as living forces, shaping dreams, impulses, decisions, and meetings with people who seem to appear at the exact right moment. When two people meet and experience an overwhelming connection, it is not mere coincidence, but a reflection of archetypal patterns activated within both. The twin flame, in this sense, is not just a romantic partner, but a living symbol that represents the union of opposites within the psyche, a call to growth, healing, and individuation. The collective unconscious works silently, weaving synchronicities, those seemingly random events that carry deep meaning. For Jung, synchronicities are evidence of a link between the inner mind and external reality. When twin flames reunite after a period of separation, there are often intense synchronicities that precede or accompany the return. These signs are not mere coincidences, they are manifestations of the self directing the process. Destiny, then, is understood as the symbolic expression of a psyche ready to move to a new level of consciousness. However, destiny is not a fixed path. It responds to the state of the soul. If the person remains unconscious, repeating patterns, avoiding shadow integration, or rejecting the inner journey, predestined encounters may not materialize, or if they do, they don't last. On the other hand, when the individual aligns with their individuation process, the symbolic field of the collective unconscious responds with clarity, organizing external events to reflect this new inner state. The reunion of twin flames, then, is less about romance and more about archetypal synchronicity. Destiny only acts at this level when both are ready, and readiness doesn't mean idealized perfection. It means a level of psychic maturity that allows the relationship to exist not as dependence but as expansion. When the self recognizes in the other a symbol of growth, it mobilizes the energies of the collective unconscious to make the encounter happen. It's as if the inner and outer universes become one movement. Jung saw archetypes as inherited psychic contents, common to all humanity. Among them, the archetype of transcendent love, the twin soul, and the sacred reunion is one of the most powerful. That's why the experience with a twin flame touches such a deep layer of being. It activates archetypal memories, ancestral stories, universal images of union and separation. In reuniting with the flame, the individual is not just reliving a personal story, but participating in a collective drama repeated in countless cultures and spiritual traditions. This symbolic aspect is essential to understand why reunion is possible. Destiny manifests as an expression of the soul that has already completed part of its journey. It does not impose, it invites. It does not determine, it offers. The decision to reunite and maintain that connection depends on the level of awareness reached. Jung believed that everything that we do not face in ourselves, we will meet as fate. That's why true reunion only happens when the shadow has been partially integrated and the projection has been understood. At that point, destiny becomes reflection. What manifests externally is an extension of what has been worked through internally. The other returns, no longer as an ideal, but as reality. The relationship becomes fertile ground for a love that is not born of lack, but of wholeness. There is no longer a struggle against fate, but collaboration with it. The psyche aligns with the self with the collective unconscious, and the collective unconscious with the right timing of the universe. Thus, destiny ceases to be a vague idea and becomes a symbolic mirror of the soul. The reunion of twin flames is not just possible, it is likely when the inner world aligns with the archetype of wholeness. At that moment, love is no longer a search, but a manifestation. Destiny, then, does not unite two bodies. It unites two journeys that have finally returned to the same point of origin, transformed, whole, ready. Throughout this journey, we dove into the deepest layers of the soul to understand why some encounters transcend time, space, and even reason. We discovered that the reunion of twin flames is not a matter of chance, but a movement of the unconscious in pursuit of integration and wholeness. Projection reveals what still needs to be embraced. Separation activates individuation. The inner union of anima and animus prepares the ground for true love, and destiny, far from being a fixed script, is revealed as the symbolic response of an awakened psyche aligned with the collective unconscious. When the soul is ready, the universe responds. But before searching outward, we must look inward, because the true reunion begins when we become whole within ourselves. Only then can the other stop being a painful absence and become a conscious presence. If this message resonated with you, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Here, every video is an invitation to transformation, and if you want to go further, watch the next content appearing on your screen. It might be the missing piece in your own individuation process.